Where are you tuned in from this fine Monday morning? I had said 7 o'clock, but it is actually 8 o'clock, just so that you don't get confused. 94.4 in Nairobi, 87.9 in Mombasa. I know, back in debt, right? Nakuru 96.0, 96.7 in Eldoret, 90.9 in Nyeri, 102.5 in Kisumu, and 97.9 in Malindi. Are you online? You are on Spice FM KE. Live streams are up on YouTube, on Twitter, and on Facebook. And for our audience, KTN Home, we are live now. Your radio experience on TV starts now, and we welcome all of you, and I say asante sana for joining us. This is the Situation Room. It's Kenya's biggest conversation. CT Muga, our guest host, Wanjiru Gikonyo for this week, and Ndruko, as we open up conversations today. Before we do that, let's go to a proverb, CT, for this morning.
Right. One tree doesn't make a forest. You would think it's obvious, isn't it?
You would think.
One
But
tree
no.
doesn't make a forest.
Right.
Yeah, it does seem obvious. Very well aligned to common sense.
Is it also not true that the things that we think, good word that we think are obvious, are the things that form that composite of what you call common sense? And the thing that is unique about common sense is uncommonality. Just when you think it would be in abundance,
It's missing quite some.
Its scarcity is the thing that you notice and observe more than anything else.
Wow.
That is also true. That is also true.
Right. It would seem that some things would be common sense as we're talking about budget issues today.
Exactly.
It would seem that as you went into a year and a half of a pandemic, it would appear that it would be only common sense that when you're then going to budget for the next year, noting that you're still in a year of pandemic, you're still in pandemic times, and you've seen that your health system has some holes here and there, it would seem like common sense for you to then budget accordingly, so that a good chunk of this budget goes towards plugging those holes and making sure that your country is healthy, your people are healthy, and that your systems are working. It would appear so.
It would. That is common sense.
That's common sense.
And like Citi has said,
it's scarce.
it is scarce. Completely.
Okay, so we're having a conversation about this week. We're looking at the budget 2020. We're looking at Kenya's money situation, and this morning we're looking specifically at the budget for health and asking very pertinent questions in terms of, so here we are with a budget in the next 1 month to be presented to the country, and looking at the major problem that has stifled growth being a health pandemic. What is the country doing to make sure, what is the government doing to make sure that its people are cushioned? And we continue with that health conversation now, and we will be joined on the line today with Bernard Chiira. Bernard Chiira is a director of a program called Innovate Now, and that program is run by the African Medical and Research Foundation, otherwise known as AMREF, and he joins us on the line. Good morning. Bernard, good morning to you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Karibu sana. You're in the room this morning with CT Muga, myself, Ndru, and Wanjiru Gikonyo, and we're opening up this conversation. And the unique thing about having a conversation with you is that you run a program where you're looking at a lot of these issues, but then also dealing on a personal level with a lot of them, like many Kenyans do, but then really don't have a platform upon which to agitate for these issues. So here we are, Bernard. Budget year, or rather budget month is 30 days away. And there are certain things that we would hope would be done, especially when we're looking at the times that we currently exist in. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. It doesn't seem like a commitment towards healthcare and proper health systems is going to happen. From your point of view, before we even get into it, what do you make of the commitments that we've seen so far?
Yeah, so let's look at it this way. Kenya is a little bit maybe over 50 years in terms of self-rule. I think tomorrow is it's 1st of June. We are celebrating the self-rule. And when you look at what we are celebrating in terms of this self-rule, the one thing that sticks to my mind is over this decade, how healthy is our nation? And if you want to know how healthy your nation is, you have to look at the most vulnerable in that nation to gauge your exposure. And of course, we are all striving toward 2030. It's the target where we have even the sustainable development goals. And one of these goals is actually health and well-being. And so coming from a pandemic here, I think this pandemic has really exposed the underbelly of, our health systems across the continent. And for me, for Kenya particularly, I know we've made steps with our NHIF, which is, the backbone or the last line of, defense for the common mwananchi that will get you a hospital bed and will get you medicine when you go in hospital. But have we done enough? I don't think so. Are we prepared enough for what's coming? I don't think so. Are there things we can do? Definitely there are things we can do, and I hope we'll be talking about some of them in this conversation.
Jumping right into it, Bernard, what are some of those things that we should do vis-a-vis what is actually being done?
Absolutely. I believe one of the first things we should do before we do anything else, I think we need a metric to measure the health status of our country. So when I say a metric, I mean, now we're talking about budgeting, but how good is our data for this budgeting? We now have health as a devolved system in this country. And if you do, an audit or a check of our primary health care, how are we preparing to boost this primary healthcare system to cater for everyone? And there's this word I love called inclusion, where you're not designing society for a particular group, but you're designing it for everyone so that everyone can thrive. And one of the things we don't have is a good way to collect continuously good data that can help us to do proper planning. Number two, we are now going through a pandemic. Initially, when this pandemic started, the healthcare system literally repelled COVID-related hospitalization, and even testing is not affordable for the general mwananchi. And when I look at some of the most vulnerable groups that we have in this society, and I belong to one of them, and that is persons with disabilities, how are we ensuring that they are not suffering the most in this pandemic? Are we taking care of them? Do we have data to show how many are getting tested, access to testing? How many are getting prioritized for vaccines? And I think when we start with taking stock, when we start looking, do we have data? Then we can begin to talk about what type of a nation do we want. And I think the other thing we have to look at very seriously as a country, as we plan, is how much budget are we allocating for innovation? And when I talk about innovation, it's not, it's not rocket science. It's basically solving problems by leveraging on the best available technologies to get different results. I think one of the things we're suffering from in this country is doing things all over doing things the same all over and expecting different results. And that never happens. So we need to leverage on the innovation capacity of this country to ensure that we are actually solving our own health problems, building local solutions, building capacity, and giving and putting the most vulnerable in our society at the front line of this planning.
I'd like to ask you a question, if I may. You did mention that we don't have very good means of collecting data. Could you expound on this and say a little bit of what it is you mean by that statement?
Yeah, I think I'll just use an example. We just had a a census recently, yeah? And when you look at the national census, it does not happen every day. I think it happens every 10 years.
Yes.
A lot of the planning that, this country for many years has been doing has been based on data that is 10 years old. Now, the thing I want to ask is, if you're planning with the data that was collected all these years ago, how are you projecting your needs into the future? So when I mean we need to do better planning and better data collection, what I mean is we have to be a metrics-driven nation. Our counties have to leverage on the best available technology. And today's technology is not a reserve of, one sector. We've seen governments in other countries that are more advanced than us basically solve problems because they are continually collecting data, they are continually analyzing that data, and they are using that data to plan. So when I mean we need to do better data collection, exactly what I mean is our county government should be the best at telling us how many persons with disabilities in your county, for example, have not gotten tested for COVID. How many are having are more at risk if they get this COVID or any other element? Let me not just talk about COVID. And when you're planning, there's something we call projecting into the future, because you're not just planning for now, you're planning for the whole year until we are reading another budget. And I think how this can be achieved, of course, is through leveraging on our national, we do have K&SPS, but we also need to do proper public-private partnerships that are able to leverage on the capacity within academia, the capacity within private sector, and the innovation and solutions that are being built by entrepreneurs to solve some of these problems that we have.
Yeah, can I jump in? You talked about primary health care, and of course, primary health care is very important, and county governments play a very important role. From the point of view of AMREF, I know you work very closely with government, you've worked very closely in the COVID response. What was the status of primary health care at the outset when the pandemic broke? And have we seen improvements now? And do you think there is enough investment in that primary health care? And maybe this is happening under the universal health care system as well. So maybe you can enlighten us on where are we? Have we made gains? And are the investments adequate, or do we need more?
Thank you. So, I work for a division of AMREF that really leverages on technology to solve social health problems or public health problems, and that is AMREF Health Innovation. And, from my perspective, AMREF has been trying to really be the driver of this conversation called universal health coverage. Mm-hmm. And this is actually one of the pillars of what we are talking about here. Can every Kenyan access primary health care affordably without breaking the bank? So where are we? I think we are at a point where we have made some gains. I talked about we do have an operational, at least, national health fund, which gives every Kenyan access to primary health care. The problem around how I see this is that, first of all, and this goes back again to the data conversation, how do we actually measure, the effectiveness of this NHIF in terms of resources? We've had in the media report in the past of mismanagement of funds. We've had this country even receive grants to respond, for example, to primary healthcare challenges, including something like this pandemic. But how much of that has been used to boost our NHIF so that it actually covers everyone? And one of the things I want to mention to you here is in terms of where we are just starting this journey. Until we get, one of the biggest problems we have in this country is we are underinsured. The last time I checked our statistics on insurance, and I know there are different forms of insurance, but in this case, I will talk about health insurance. We were doing under 2% as a country. But NHIF is boosting that and is trying to give everyone access to basic primary health care. And what AMREF has been doing is to work closely with government and the private sector to actually increase those numbers, specifically amongst the most marginalized. But more needs to be done for groups like persons with disability, because, for example, I can tell you, NHIF does not cover regular medication that is taken by some persons with disability. It does not cover assistive technologies, which include things like wheelchairs, hearing aids, and these are actually enshrined in the law, international law that Kenya subscribes to, and this is called the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, and we are party to that international law. It has been operationalized in Kenya through the Disability Act of 2003, but to this date, I can tell you that most persons with disability cannot access these basic products and services that they need, not to be a level higher than anyone, but to be at par.
Bernard, I've got to ask you, Bernard, is this because of lack of knowledge of what these needs are, or are we looking at a lack of priority? Because also when we look at budgets, there are a plethora of people who are involved in the process, and it involves experts in different sectors to say, all right, if we're going to budget in this area, you need somebody who needs to be then aware of what is needed before then you apply certain kinds of funds or revenue towards it, right? Now, from your knowledge, because we're looking at, health all encompassing, right? But then there's certain parts of it that would need an extra eye. So when we say that this section has not been paid adequate attention to, is it because it is not prioritized, or is it because that there is a lack of knowledge and understanding as to what the needs are, and so that's why somebody else would get a larger chunk, for example?
Yeah, and that's a very good question, because I think it's actually a mix of both. When you look at prioritization, let me begin with prioritization. For many countries, and this is not unique to Kenya, when it comes to some issues like disability, this is usually the last to be addressed. When people are addressing other needs of society, when people are addressing marginalized groups, persons with disability will usually be the last ones to be mentioned. So how this has actually been tackled is, of course, in Kenya, we have a very progressive constitution that actually entrenches these rights in the constitution. And we also have the Disability Act, which is very old. And I know the Senator for Persons with Disability has been trying to amend this law so that some of these things can actually be effected. So on prioritization, I think, in my view, any country that prioritizes health, inclusive healthcare, meaning that everyone is covered, that is a kind of country that can actually, emerge and actually, when you're talking about development in Africa, it is a country that secures the health of the people first that will actually be successful. And when it comes to the issue of awareness, we actually have a huge problem in that aspect. And I work in this sector. It's a part of the health conversation, actually. But when you ask many people what assistive technology is, it is not something that for a long time has been prioritized or actually been discussed as a need. And when you have data that's telling you that 15% of the global population has one or more forms of a disability. We are talking of a billion people globally. In Kenya, when we did our last census, I think it is last year, we see data telling us that at least 1 million people in Kenya have one or other forms of a disability. And some of the needs that come with it are actually anchored on healthcare.
Right.
So how are we leveraging on innovation to help us solve this? And I'll speak a little bit about that as we proceed, because there has been some progress in this, and I think Kenyans need to know, but we can do more.
But
Go ahead.
Bernard, you used the term universal health cover. Government uses the term universal health care. This has become quite political. What is Kenya doing, and what does Kenya need based on what you're telling us?
Yeah. First of all, I think when it comes to this topic of healthcare and universal health cover or coverage, I think the basic understanding here that we have to get is very simple. Does every citizen of this country have access to quality, affordable primary health care? That means, if for all sake, is it easy, regardless of a disability or age or gender, is it easy for you to access healthcare? That is what we are talking about when it comes to universal health cover or coverage. Of course, how this is covered is through insurance schemes, and also ensuring that the private sector is incentivized or works together with government to actually have favorable insurance policies. For example, it is very unfair for any insurance company at this point in time to say they are not covering COVID-related hospitalization. Why? This is the time when insurance is needed to save our people. There are many people in ICU with severe COVID paying from pocket, and despite having insurance, they cannot actually get covered. And I'm speaking about this from a very personal perspective as well, of a family member. So then when you talk about what do we need to do? We need to, first of all, not just plan for the here and now. We need to look at the capacity of local manufacturing in the healthcare sector. We have some of the leading research institutions in Africa in health. Look at KEMRI. Some of the most respected scientists in the world have come from KEMRI. But how are we budgeting to actually ensure we have capacity to do local production? Because the moment you don't have that capacity and the borders are closed, what happens? We are now crying for COVAX because we did not anticipate that at some point we need to have our own vaccine.
When we're discussing COVID, the reality is people are at different levels of handling it. They open up the economy, they have to shut down certain segments of it. They have vaccinated 50% of their population, growing, meaning it's a work in progress. And before it got here, it's given people a hell of a time. It isn't as though that we are going to get a handle of it. Even when you have vaccinated 100% of your population, the truth of the matter is you are still going to need to continue testing people. And it doesn't mean that once someone has been vaccinated, they will not get COVID. You will. You can. The only difference is you now have protection, and the likelihood of having those extremely adverse effects will not be there. But let me then get to my question. There's something you mentioned earlier on, Bernard, about data. What would you like to see in operation that would specifically benefit people with disabilities? Because you say that according to what we have, our policies are a little outdated. If we were to update them, how would we update them?
Hello, Bernard, are you there?
Yes, thank you for that question.
It's all right,
It's
Bernard.
okay. He can join the conversation. It's absolutely
say hi
fine.
to our brother over there and tell him we're fine. And tell him to tell us his name, please.
While he's
Yeah,
there.
so this is actually my son. So thank you. I really love that question because it actually puts into perspective, something that everyone is talking about. Data is, you've had conversations or terms like data is the new oil. But what does it actually mean? It means as a country, as a government, we are doing such a great job in actually collecting data and analyzing data, and actually using the tools that we have to give this insight for planning and actually for budget purposes. What I would like to see more is a portal or actually a resource that anyone could go into and actually see what do our projections look like in terms of number of persons with disabilities, for example, in every county, number of the distribution of the needs of these people from a healthcare perspective. And I'm talking about assistive technologies, access to essential medicines, and I think one of the most important things from any budgeting perspective is that at the end of the budget period, not only do you want to report that you met your budget, you want to say that according to the projections which you had, you can actually do a little bit of predictive analysis to actually say, to actually guide the budgeting for that next financial year. And until we start doing that as a country, it's going to be very difficult to actually plan for some of these things, including things that we are not prepared for, like pandemic.
Okay, so I know, Wanjiru, you had, something along those lines.
Yeah, no, the thing that provoked me was the statement you made before, Bernard, about insurance and the cover of COVID-related. Now, a majority of insurance companies are not covering COVID-related illness. I think there are a few that are. That's not across the board. Just last week, the NHIF has also said they will not cover NHIF-related illness, especially for those members under ordinary cover. Only those with the super cover will be eligible for support. In essence, Bernard, in this country, we know that Kenyans pay for their own healthcare. In fact, the average Kenyan spends maybe 200% of their income on health because we spend more than we have. We sell plots, we do harambes and all of that. So the issue of who pays and the ability to treat ourselves, that problem is still with us. And I think COVID has exacerbated it because people have had to dig very deep to pay. So I don't know, from where you sit, what needs to be done to ensure that government puts in the money into the primary health care, into the COVID support? Let's even, before we start thinking about the policy moving forward, we talk about now, what needs to be done to help Kenyans come out of this?
Yeah, so, this question of what needs to be done is something we have to keep asking again and again. But I think one of the most powerful things you can do when it comes to governance is actually civic engagement and public and the voice of the mwananchi. Because at the end of the day, if the people do not have a platform, they do not have a voice, the changes that we want to see will not happen. So one of the things I feel that needs to happen is to amplify the voice of the mwananchi. The mwananchi needs to say that, look, I'm a Kenyan. I am suffering because I cannot afford, the hospitalization of my fellow family member, and ask questions like, why is the health budget not able to help me as a mwananchi. And I think engagement and involvement of the citizens is what any leader who wants to make change in this country has to do. And when we talk about the devolved system of government that we have, especially at the county level, one of the things I would love to know is that when we are budgeting, I saw something very interesting on TV a couple of months back. I think it was Makueni County, where they actually go to the ground and get the priorities from Wanjiru. Are all our counties doing that?
Okay.
That's number one.
Well, I mean, even for you, Wanjiru, as you are looking at this and talking about public participation and then how far public needs to then be involved when it comes to things like this, because majority of the Mwananchi walking into a public facility, walking into a health facility, how guaranteed are you that you will be able to then get the services that you require? And that's what we're talking about now. Prioritizing some of these things and saying, look, before we go out here, let's make sure that down here everybody's taken care of. Because if you want to look at what's happening on a global scale right now, for those countries who are paying their people to be vaccinated, for those countries who are saying get back vaccine passport, what have they done? They have made sure that the people that they govern and lead have been taken care of.
Right.
There's no handout unless what is at home has been cared for.
Totally. And I completely agree with what Bernard is saying, the point you're making. And, the evidence shows that a successful fiscal consolidation program, which is the context in which our budget is being made, requires evidence. So the point that Bernard is making is right on point, that we need to stop this kind of juju that we do with maybe we put some money here, it will help. Where are the numbers? We put all this money in the SGR. Where are the numbers to show how many jobs have been created? How many livelihoods are being improved or will be improved? So we need to move to evidence-based decision making. We also need the public participation. And public participation, like James said, shouldn't be tokenistic. This government has perfected the art of tokenism. An advert in the paper, asking for submissions, and they do not listen. And they fail to learn from history, which is, in the 1990s, governments admitted we failed our people because we didn't listen, because people know what they need. If you ask people, public participation, what do you need in terms of your healthcare, they'll be able to say.
Right.
So public participation is about the ability to influence outcomes and having meaningful engagement processes. This is what the BBI ruling said. The constituent power of the people cannot be undermined. It is paramount. Now, this government does not listen. They kind of forced infrastructure development projects into the budget in 2013, 2014, 2015, and are shackled to them and have shackled us to those projects, some of which have failed and have continued to add others. And these are squeezing out the meaningful development. Then you hear what Muragori said. He said that the investment at county level has also decreased because the conditional funds for health have been put into the ordinary share. And once they're in the ordinary share, there is no guarantee it will go to health. So in essence, this government is not applying common sense that we said is very uncommon. And indeed, it's uncommon. And the government is proving that. And the question is, what do we do? The train is almost off the rails. It's been going off the rails because we've been saying this debt issue, it's a train crash waiting to happen. And it's happening in slow motion. And we are on it. And the question is, what do we do? And
Do we jump off or hope for the best?
Jump off to where?
We
need a COVID visa. Where are you jumping off to? Which country is taking?
Where are you going?
These millions of Kenyans. We are here.
That issue is a symptom. It's not the problem.
Exactly.
It's like COVID has helped us understand the underbelly of our issues.
COVID has brought out the cold sore.
The
virus is inside.
Yes, the virus is inside.
Yeah.
Because if you think about public participation, even before it was enshrined in our constitution, in every human society, people always congregate and talk and discuss their issues. In an African setting, it's even more so. And in the absence of a system where you know you can wholly depend on the government, people have to get together and talk and do all sorts of things.
First of all, we shouldn't have to wholly depend on government. And I like the point that Bernard said, that government has to partner with private sector to be able to deliver health services. And that's what's anticipated under the UHC. The problem is, will it be implemented? So we want to move from dependency on government to more voice by citizens and more self-governance, so that citizens have a more active role in development other than waiting for maendeleo. That's a switch. And I think Bernard also said, leaders who want change. There is a presumption that the common sense approach response to COVID is transformation. It is to say we cannot continue as we are with corruption, with a kind of development that government delivers everything. We need to decentralize, we need to devolve, decentralize, and we need to be accountable. And that takes political leadership. So the other pillar of this, the public participation, using the evidence, political leadership.
Wanjiru, that particular thinking is correct insofar as it's aspirational, in that politicians ought to. We know they won't. So those who actually do are such a small number that statistically they're almost irrelevant.
I agree.
But the issue, and this one, we will never tire of saying
speaking about it.
Yes, because so long as people do not hold their leaders accountable, well, then what do you think you will expect?
Maybe we change the statement from political leadership to leadership.
So just
wherever
leadership
that
as a
leadership
whole
comes
finds
from,
you. Yeah.
wherever the leadership comes from, you saw that the bishops last week released a statement. That is leadership. Leadership will not come. What we are saying is the political class has let us down. There are very few in the political class who are using common sense and the interests of Wanjiru. But leadership does not only reside in the political class, and maybe that's where our mistake is.
You know, Wanjiru,
so change will come
everything
from leadership.
that we talk about in this country and everything that happens, unfortunately, the political leadership hogs the bulk of the powers that have to do with decision making. Because of those powers, parliament captive, okay? Civil
Political
service
leadership.
captive.
Political leadership.
Yes. The only institution that seems to be breaking the mold and trying to sort itself out in the three arms of the government seems to be the
The
judiciary.
judiciary.
Yes.
Can I convince you?
Can I
Siti?
ask Bernard something? I mean, just coming into
sorry.
that in terms of priorities now, Bernard, is that are we seeing that talking about these issues or agitating for them will bring about a little bit more than, unseating any kind of uncomfortability? It beyond making the powers that be, quote unquote, is there something that can be done forthwith? Because we're not looking at a disaster in the making, we're talking about a disaster today. Okay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Bernard.
Yeah. I think I just want to put into perspective some of the, things that we can do now, and some of the things we ought to have done, and some of the things we actually need plan to do in the future. One, by now we ought to, because, one of the things we have that I see as citizens we've not been able to actually fully leverage or take advantage of is our constitution. We have one of the most progressive constitutions in this country, but the average citizen does not know how to demand their right. Okay? So one of the things we have to have already done is to actually understand that I, representing Wanjiru in this country, I have a voice. Today, luckily, people talk about channels, but when you are on social media, it's like being on the front page of a newspaper or a radio station, because everyone is going to hear about it. So I think we need to start using channels and tools like we have on social media to push agendas that are important, to give voice to the citizenry, so that these things can be prioritized. Number two, we have to change the way we are doing things. Otherwise, we will not get any different results. And I think this is common sense. Somebody talked about common sense here. So I think what we ought to be asking ourselves right now, what is it that we are doing the same every year and expecting a different outcome? And I think one of those things is everything, even public participation, which I have seen to a certain extent, is usually a last minute thing for compliance, even when laws are being passed. And I think we need to change the culture we have as a country and actually do the things that sometimes, people say, what difference will it make if I call out my leader on social media and demand my right? Or what difference will it make if I actually say, no, this is not the right thing to do? What difference will it make if I question and ask about, are my needs catered for in the next financial year, in the budget to come? And I think, the things we have to start looking into the future and start doing, both as citizens and also as government, is actually to say, what is this country that we are trying to look for, where health as a basic human right is catered for, and how do we start basically planning and putting resources in the right place and creating visibility for these resources. Let me say one of the worst things that can happen is if, for example, if you don't know or you can't see how money is being spent, how do you even begin to call out misuse of resources or poor budgeting? So how are we going to be prepared in the future to say, and I'll give an example here because I work in the space of disability, but what we are doing different is to say disability will not be sorted by charity anymore. We want persons with disability to be looked at, not just as beneficiaries, but as one, people. That's number one. Number two, as people who are users and preferences and who can actually have a choice, not to be told, okay, you have a disability, let's give you this. No. If I need a wheelchair, have you asked me whether this wheelchair is appropriate for me? Is it the right size? Is it made to meet my needs? Can I use this wheelchair to navigate the crazy terrain that we have out here? So one of the things we are doing different, and this is something we have to do different, is we have to be innovative as a country. And innovation is all about looking at the problems we have and saying, how can we, one, use new technologies to solve this problem? Two, leverage on the talent and capacities we have as a people. Kenya is one of the most educated countries in Africa. We have some of the best people here. We have some of the best solutions here. How are they being leveraged to solve the problems that we have? And then the ultimate one here is governance. And we have to care about our country. We have to not go along with this notion that, corruption is the endemic disease that is never going to end. We have to put a stop to it using data. Let's create visibility. Let's have channels where we can demand our rights. Let's engage the citizens and allow them to actually highlight their needs.
Thank you.
Is what, yeah.
I mean, there's a lot to talk about to cover this, but I mean, just from what you've said, a good place to wrap up this conversation this morning. Bernard Chiira, who is the Director of Innovate Now with AMREF Kenya. Asante Sana for joining us this morning. The conversation continues.